Happy New Year, Norse Code fans. It is once again time for your number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, Norse Code. Shiny new for 2015, but with the same old host you know and love. I'm Dusty O'Connell, and I am here with our in-house analyst, the editor-in-chief of Vikings Territory, which it appears has adopted a podcast of its own, and a contributor to Daily Norseman, Optimum Scouting, Vikings Journal. Anything else? Have you gotten any other jobs while you were on vacation?
Yeah. I don't think you mentioned the Sportsnot thing.
Ah, yes. You're right. Wait. You're writing for Sportsnot now?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, there you go. That is the finely tuned, smooth, silky voice of Arif Hassan that you are hearing, who... You've actually got a guest spot this week on the Vikings Territory, I guess now official podcast, Purple for the Win with Andy Carlson.
Yeah, it's kind of weird to have a guest spot on the podcast that you host, but yeah. Get that one up and running soon.
That's good stuff. I support the expansion of the Vikings podcast universe. We had toyed around briefly with the idea of like a massive panel show to kind of recap the season and all enter our opinions as to the beginning of the Mike Zimmer / Teddy Bridgewater era, which I think we can safely say is a thing now. But the logistics of such a thing would prove to be just ludicrous. So we decided to just kind of break it up so you can get 4 or 5 doses of Arif spaced out throughout your week with different hosts, then rather than have to come to Norse Code for all of your Arif Hassan spoken word football goodness. It turns out a lot of you do come to Norse Code for your spoken word football goodness. I just wanted to take this moment and say thank you to everybody for an amazing season of Norse Code. As amazing or not amazing as the Viking season has been, it has been a genuine pleasure to continue to produce this show for you. We have now survived 2 years on the air without throwing up our hands in disgust and quitting. And I noticed last week as I was just kind of reviewing statistics that with this episode that you're listening to right now, Norse Code will pass 85,000 total downloads.
I mean, assuming that people download this one.
We're like 200 away. This would have to be the least popular episode of Norse Code of all time by a significant margin in order for us to not reach 85,000 downloads with this episode. So,
what is our current least popular episode of all time? Do you know?
Oh boy, I can look it up. It'll take me a moment though.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was the Holiday Clip Show special.
What's that about? Is that your least favorite episode? Is that what you're saying?
No, we didn't get a lot of comments.
Ah, that's true. But chances are everybody was doing what we were doing. Our apologies for not being here the last couple of weeks, but I mean you were on an amazing and fantastical vacation to the fabled land of Vermont, as I understand it, and wherever Arshad's partner's family is from. And I, of course, took Vermont. Excellent. I took my, annual vacation to the frozen north for a week over the holiday, which led to me taking an unscheduled trip on New Year's Eve to Salt Lake City and then being stranded there by a missed airplane connection. But no, I'm not surprised we didn't get terribly many comments on the last show, just because we weren't even here to comment on the Vikings. That's just the nature of the holidays, I believe. But now it's back to work for all of us, I think. Maybe not the Minnesota Vikings. Even Mike Zimmer said they were going to take a little bit of time off before starting to plan for their 2015. Our least popular episode from this season has been... Actually, one of the preseason episodes might come close. But you're right. It presently looks like Norse Code Holiday Special, yeah.
Yeah, look at that.
Episode 53 with Kyle Segal.
Really?
is down there. That is the second least popular episode.
That makes me happy for no reason at all.
Oh, actually, that's not true. We have a clear winner. Clear loser, I guess. Episode 50, part 2, which came between the Saints and Falcons game during the season.
Was it posted on a Saturday or something?
Actually, no. We posted part 1 on September 25th. Yeah, and then we posted part 2 on the 26th, which was a Friday. Mm-hmm. And posting on a Friday is just death for podcasts. There's a reason that all the horrible political news comes out on a Friday.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, that one 480 downloads, our least popular episode, and
480.
Yep.
Wow. People didn't even bother.
Well, some of them did. Our most dedicated core of listeners who automatically download the show to their mobile devices every week downloaded the episode and then did not listen to it.
Right. Thank God for 4G, I guess.
Well, thank God for slightly smaller files, though. It's one of the things we've been able to bring in this wonderful new year of Norse Code. I guess to put a final point on that, thank you most of all to everybody who has contributed to keep the lights on at the show now that we have decided to eschew traditional commercial broadcasting revenue, or lack of revenue as the case may be, and going for the public radio model, or as a guy on a plane put it to me, the internet busker model.
Did you talk about the podcast on a plane?
Yes. It came up in conversation. You know, sometimes you sit on an airplane next to somebody who just wants to talk.
Yeah, I don't mind those people.
I know. Well, sometimes I do. Sometimes I just put in my headphones and I just want to sleep because, I'd like to fly at weird times of the day. But, I decided to humor this guy, and he seemed interesting. I got to hear some great stories about fighting fires in Florida, which apparently is what he does. And, excuse me, we talked podcasting for a little bit. But, yeah, he was a little, like he said, he accused us of being internet buskers, which I like the image of you and me just like sitting on the Pearl Street Mall in Boulder with like Vikings gear on and no guitar, just like talking
about the Vikings
behind an empty guitar case.
Donation bucket. Yeah.
There's like an open laptop bag with like a few dollar bills in it. Like, so that was a pleasant mental image. And he was not impressed with, he made it pretty clear that he was like, oh, so you guys just ask for money. What do you get, like $2? And I was like, well, no, actually, we only ask for $5 from every listener once. And what we found is that our average donation is significantly higher than $5. And we often get people donating multiple times, such as Brad Davis at Delta BC Dad on Twitter, a regular fan, a multiple donator to the show, and a frequent interactor with us on Twitter. He lights a fire under us if we don't post an episode on time, which is nice. He performs a very valuable service for us in that regard. And he contributed some money after hearing my rant about goddamn stupid potato salad Kickstarter guy on the Christmas special.
Which you should download because evidently none of you like clip shows.
It's, as clip shows go, it's pretty good.
It's not just like a blooper reel, and there are some bloopers in it, but the bloopers aren't like weird and stupid and set up like you see at the end of like high school video projects.
It's true that they're all actual, and I think, and I suspect you would agree that the best reason to listen to it is that you can finally get in on the Vince Young / Reggie Book Heisman joke that we have been alluding to for probably 18 months now without ever fully explaining. But it was
it's still my favorite bit we've ever done on the show.
Pretty great impromptu riffing.
Didn't even end up in the show.
But it was so long after the show and had nothing to do with anything we talked about. Like, we were just screwing around for like half an hour after we had finished taping, and we got off on this thought experiment. What does it really mean to win the Heisman?
It turns out that the answer is slightly, but not significantly more complicated than you would reasonably expect.
That's true, and it would actually make good fodder for a sitcom.
Yes. It creates ontological problems, and those ontological problems are best resolved with a laugh track.
Aren't they? Aren't they usually? That's how I prefer to solve my ontological crises. Epistemological ones, less so.
It's more for like a Netflix original.
Which have you watched Marco Polo at all?
No, I was like worried it might get racist, so I never watched it.
Strongly recommend. It is quite good.
I noticed you haven't commented about the racism thing.
Yeah, I mean, what?
It's worth the racism? Is that what you're trying to get to me?
Well, I'm okay. So I'm not terribly far into the show, and I honestly like, other than just kind of a portrayal of a time in history when Kublai Khan was a racist. Like I don't really know what you're talking about. It doesn't seem like.
Well, I don't care if the characters in the show, obviously they're going to be racist. How does that show work if the characters aren't racist? No, I'm just thinking.
That's what I'm saying, and I don't think there's any objectionable larger lesson or anything to the show. But I'm not that far into it, so I may not be the best person to judge.
Sure. Well, I'll check it out though. Thanks for the recommend.
Alrighty then. Yeah. So, welcome to Norse Code. Our season is functionally over. I guess we could review the Bears game, but what is there to say that hasn't already been said? Let's instead turn to the Viking season as a whole. Kind of sit back in our big comfy leather chairs with our Sherlock pipes and monocles and spew hot takes into the internet for future digestion by our listeners.
Into the internet ether.
That's where all hot takes eventually go. Some of them start out in real life, but they all end up on the internet.
That's good, I guess.
So, speaking of hot takes, I'm becoming more and more firmly convinced that no one should ever read rant sports.
Yeah, so you're probably setting this up for. So we don't have the show notes in front of us like we normally do.
That's true. We're flying without a net. Well, yeah, there are links, but it's going to be a mystery to Arif where I'm going with all of these segues. So he's going to have to have his game extremely on point today.
That's great. Half the time I don't look at the second half of the show notes, so it's basically the same thing. But well, it's the only way that the number of the week really works. If I have no idea what it is and I proffer a fake guess, I think once or twice I was pretty close. Anyway. I don't know what specifically you're referring to in terms of hot takes from Rant Sports. My experience with them hasn't been great, although I think they have stopped putting autoplay videos in. I wouldn't know because I have an app that's awesome, but I think they have because those autoplay videos were not just autoplay videos, which by themselves are the worst, but they were also the worst possible autoplay videos because they were like radio shock jock type stuff, but on video. It was bad. Anyway. The weird thing to me about Rant Sports is I think Sean Jensen, formerly of the Pioneer Press and also occasionally writes about the Chicago Bears for Chicago publications, writes for Rant Sports now, I think. I've seen his stuff at Rant Sports, and that's unusual to me because he's a very measured guy, and I like what he does. And so that's unusual, but I do not have a ton of love for Rant Sports. Although, I have, seen stuff in there that I like. By and large, I don't like it, and so I try not to click on it when I can. Anyway, what is the reason for this segue? What brought up the hot takes?
Well, Rant Sports just structurally does a couple of things that I don't like. If you look at their, banner ads of choice, they are ads that are targeted to simpletons. I
also have ad block, so.
Well, then you wouldn't notice that Rant Sports is full of the worst kind of BuzzFeed type ads, like an obvious Photoshop of a large man's physique with a small man's head on top.
No.
And the caption is, "You won't believe this man's story" or whatever. And the next one is
trainers hate him.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And then the one after that is a pretty girl holding a kitten that was stolen off the front page of the Chive or something. And it's something about like 6 amazing facts about, this woman or kittens or some nonsense. Just the worst kind of tripe. Terrible ads and really, really clickbaity headlines. Like the kind of headlines that are written in sort of a way where you're like, oh, I should really read this story because it's gonna, something really important in the NFL is happening. And then it just turns out to be like extreme, like borderline irresponsible speculation.
Okay, so I just turned ad block off and I turned flash block off to get on the Rand Sports. First, they still do have autoplay videos, which is awful. Although they're not, it doesn't seem like they were of the flavor that they were before. Then on the side, I see some of these ads. So there's the Kate Upton in space, the whole bit where she was there, and that was a really gift moment. Anyway, so the article or whatever the link is, watch what happens, incredible. Then there's 9 men you won't believe exist, which is Photoshopped. It's actually really
Tell me what I'll believe. You don't know me.
Right. 13 incredible photos captured at the perfect moment, optical illusions that look dirty, obviously. When's the last time this happened in your backyard? Find out how to make it happen. And it's a bunch of girls who look like the topless, but actually they aren't.
It's marketed at 9-year-olds, maybe 10-year-olds. Like it's an embarrassment to SEO, and their headlines are written in this really like tricky way. And they got me good about 2/3 of the way through the season with a really clickbaity headline about what would happen if they were to trade Adrian Peterson to the Cowboys and get, maybe DeMarco Murray and, some other nonsensical thing for it.
So, nonsense like DeMarco Murray, who, by the way, is a free agent, so probably can't be traded. Well, so interesting you bring that up. So I want you to talk more about it, but that'll be in a second because I just clicked on an article published today in Rand Sports because, of course, you sent me there and provided them revenue as a result. But okay, so
is this the Josh Morgan one?
No, I clicked on this one just because it's benign but kind of stupid. If you could identify the top priority for the Vikings this offseason, maybe even if you just narrow it down to free agency priority, or even if you just narrow it down to players currently on the roster that you need to extend, that kind of priority. What would you say is like the most important thing for the Vikings in the offseason to do from like a free agency perspective? You had to choose one.
I would have to look at a list of free agents this year, but
well, do you think it would be re-signing backup defensive tackle Tom Johnson?
No.
Well, re-signing Tom Johnson should be Minnesota Vikings' top priority.
Well, okay.
And I mean, we talked about him a lot in the podcast. He was very good for the Vikings, especially as sort of a backup defensive tackle. But also he's a backup defensive tackle. He's had one good year. This is that good year. I think that he's going to be better with Mike Zimmer than he was with anyone else. But, even starting linebacker Jasper Brinkley is a higher re-sign priority for me, and I don't even want him to start next year.
But that is exactly the kind of like clickbaity headline that Rand Sports specializes in. The Adrian Peterson thing, got me where they, came up with some scenario where they trade Peterson to the Cowboys for a draft pick and then, take whatever, I think it's like $12 million in cap space that they get from letting go of Peterson and use it to sign DeMarco Murray. The whole thing seemed very implausible at the time. I was like, really? Why would they go to all that trouble? And then today, what do I see but an article about how if the Vikings are going to sign anyone in the offseason, they should be taking a long, hard look at Josh Gordon.
Oh, yeah. No, I've seen that floated around. First, I'm not against trading Adrian Peterson. And second, Josh Gordon is like plausible as a target. Not a good target. It's plausible as a target because he put up like 1,600 yards in 10 games under North Turner last year with like Brandon Weeden and Brian Hoyer throwing to him. So like, I understand. And you could reasonably make the argument that Mike Zimmer's the kind of guy who believes in giving second chances. And Josh Gordon was a phenomenal worker for the car dealership that he worked for while he was suspended. So
That's fantastic. Good for him.
yeah,
But that
well,
kind
actually, there's like quotes from like his employer and his coworkers, like, yeah, he worked really hard. He almost like closed a deal. It was great.
the sarcasm is strong in this one. Oh my goodness. I just don't like. I just don't see him fitting into the kind of locker room that the Vikings, like to maintain. I mean, leaving aside all the stuff that we said earlier in the season about the Vikings like leading the arrest list or whatever active players, and leaving aside all the we you and me and James pretty much stood around Josh Gordon and like we're like screw that guy when he finally got suspended for the rest of the season. I mean, I just really can't see the Vikings wanting somebody with, a history of off-field issues coming and potentially, signing a contract and then spending another year, sitting on the sidelines after violating the substance abuse policy. Again, it would be different if the way that he had violated the substance abuse policy this season was not so stupid. I might buy into the half a sentence, the one clause notion on the Rant Sports article that, Minnesota builds a good, locker room atmosphere and manages to create a drama-free, which was funny to me given that this article appeared on Rant Sports 24 hours after, or maybe 48 hours after news came out that Jabari Price was arrested for DUI. But it's just like, I disapprove of Rant Sports' kind of technique of making outlandish speculation and oftentimes, not very well-founded speculation seem like, important NFL news. Like, the Vikings need to, re-sign Tom Johnson most of all. And, your average Viking fan is going to be like, Tom Johnson, who's he? Click.
Right. No, yeah.
It's slimy. At least when I, make wildly irresponsible prognostications, I advertise them as such. And when I say wildly uninformed things, they're buried deep within a very long podcast, which is pretty much the opposite of SEO.
Right. Well, okay. So this actually reminds me of something the NFL Network did actually right before the Colts Bengals game, and something that ESPN did in the offseason before this year, which is they had someone share an opinion that was sort of out of left field. It had like the pathos of someone with authority. I think for ESPN it was Jaws, who does his quarterback rankings every year, and for NFL Network is like one of their former players that's like clearly going to go into the Hall of Fame or is already in it. One of those two things. And they just said something. So for the NFL Network, it was Jaws saying, I think, Colin Kaepernick, he could be the greatest quarterback since, Joe Montana. And I'm not saying he's there now. I'm saying that he could get there, which, like, in the abstract sense, like, yeah, I suppose every quarterback could get there. But, like, your argument is that Colin Kaepernick has, a better shot than almost anyone in the NFL of getting to, like, Joe Montana standard. That's absurd. Hey, fine. That's just like a dude's opinion. NFL Network did the same thing. Some dude said, I forgot who it was, that the Bengals were actually better off without AJ Green on the roster, which, okay, it's like some dude's opinion. Both clearly is sort of stupid, whatever opinions. But then the thing that's the issue is that ESPN took Jaws's like ranking, and you probably have already seen Deadspin break this down, or I think it was maybe even Awful Announce who broke it down. And they used it to drive their news cycle for like the next 2 days. So they created a story, then they covered the story they created. The NFL Network did the same thing, but it was the morning of, the Bengals game, and so they couldn't keep driving the story for anything more than a few hours, especially because the Bengals got walloped. Because if the Bengals had won, then they'd be able to like see, Andy Dalton is much better off without any weapons, or whatever. And so. Yeah, it's just like it's the same thing where sort of something that isn't news is created. So speculation, opinion, whatever. But then the existence of that speculation, opinion, whatever, is then treated as news. And so, the thing with, websites, maybe like Rant Sports, maybe a lot of other websites out there, is that, in the headline, they'll make that sort of speculation, but they'll treat it as fact instead of, this author's opinion, whatever, which, I'll do at times too, just because it creates sort of a better way to drive people into your website. It's the same thing as SEO. But then it creates like sort of the cycle, which is, pretty obnoxious.
It's the sort of thing that I would like to see, of course, less of on the internet, but unfortunately it remains the best way to make money with a website on the internet. So I wish Rant Sports a long and successful career of, I guess, click whoring.
Hooray.
So what are you brought up the question kind of facetiously, what are the Vikings, biggest free agency re-signing priorities given, individual player performance over the course of the season?
Well, there's like two categories of this, right? Like there's the Vikings should, re-sign free agents from, this year, right? And then there's the Vikings should, potentially extend people who are about to enter free agency, next year. That second category is not really the sort of deal we're talking about between now and March, right? Before those free agents sort of hit the open market and the Vikings are now in competition with 31 other teams. But I think that now that Jerome Felton has opted out of this restructured contract, I think that Felton is loads better than Zach Line based off of what I saw of him in camp and what I saw of him in the preseason. Admittedly, not as much as the Vikings saw sort of in practice. And, they elected to keep two fullbacks on the roster, an already unusual decision, presumably because Zach Line was too talented to let go. Based on what I saw, again, not a very large sample, I thought that was very minimal. And I think that the fullback is a lot more important to Norv Turner's offense than people like to give away or people like to give the impression of, because Turner has consistently had a fullback in his offense since he's been an offensive coordinator. Every single year he had one in Cleveland. The 1 year he was there, he had them in San Diego. And sometimes, that didn't work out because, so many running backs got injured. He moved the fullback, and in Cleveland's case, Obanaya to running back, and in San Diego's case, occasionally like Mike Tolbert to halfback. But, for the most part, he's always had a fullback, and the running schemes are not often designed by Norv Turner. In fact, the guy who designed the running schemes in San Diego was actually the offensive coordinator, and Norv Turner, was the head coach, but he was, for all intents and purposes, the offensive coordinator, except when it came to coordinating the run game. And so someone else did that, and that guy ended up resigning because he saw like no upward mobility in his job, and he saw that there was like he didn't get enough credit for what he did, which I understand. But Norv Turner isn't the guy that designs the run schemes, but he always relies on people who design run schemes who are reliant on fullbacks. And so in this case, I think Jerome Felton, I know that he opted out of his contract and can sign with anybody. I don't think the reason he opted out of his contract is because he doesn't want to stick with the Vikings. I think the reason is because when the Vikings asked him to restructure, he took a pay cut, but he did it so that he could get a pay raise somewhere else with his performance this year. I think that he deserves that pay raise, and I think the Vikings should be the one that gives it to him because he's one of the better fullbacks that's available, period. After that, I think that Jasper Brinkley is a higher re-signing priority than Tom Johnson, just because I think Brinkley is a better backup and middle linebacker in the Mike Zimmer system than any of us have, given credit for, especially upon review. Tom Johnson, again, very good defensive tackle for the first 6 or 7 weeks of the season, was the best defensive tackle on the roster. But I don't think that's sustainable. He's going to be 32 when the season starts, and it just happens to be that this year was his best year. I don't think that you can rely on a 1 year bump of performance, even in a new system with a new coach and everything like that, to be sustainable. But I think he's probably third on that list. After that, it's kind of a wasteland. Asiata is a restricted free agent. I suppose you could probably re-sign him. After that, I'm not too interested in signing Colin Leffler, Corey Wooten, Vladikas, Mike Harris. I like Joe Berger, but he's going to be 34. He even played well, but he's going to be 34. So Those three are basically the only people that I'd want to resign.
And not Jasper Brinkley.
No, Jesper Brinkley was there.
Oh, yeah.
John Felton, Jesper Brinkley.
Oh, yeah, you just don't want him to start.
Yeah, I just don't want him to start. I want to resign him, but I want him to be the backup to either a drafted middle linebacker or, who knows, Ollie Cole.
but not Chad Greenway.
Yeah, well, he's gone, right? You gotta get rid of him.
Yeah. Kyle West from the Purple People podcast said this week that he thinks the Vikings want Zach Line to be their guy, like long term. Do you believe there's any truth to that?
I think there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that supports that, and I think that that's like a reasonable opinion to hold. I don't. I think they might. I mean, why else do you keep a fullback for 2 consecutive years who isn't going to play for you unless you see a lot of value in him? Like, that makes sense. Again, 2 fullbacks. The Vikings are like, well, the Seahawks did too, I guess, but Vikings are functionally one of the only teams, if not the only team in the league, to consistently prefer having 2 fullbacks on a roster. And there were even 2 fullbacks active on game day at times, one of them Zach Line. You can't help but think they see a lot of value in him as a fullback. I can't wait to be proven wrong about that too, because I don't think he's great at blocking. Who knows?
So other side of free agency, what about people who are going to what about the second thing? People who are going to be in free agency that will be competing, or that the Vikings will be competing with the rest of the NFL and trying to pick up. Who are there any key positions that can be filled by free agency this year? Or
so I'm gonna end up writing a series for Vikings Journal ranking the top 50 free agents specifically for the Vikings. And so I've been asked to keep it secret for suspense and clicks.
That's fair.
So I can't tell you what the names are, although I think a lot of people can sort of guess at the names. I think the positions are pretty easy to guess, too. I think that you want to take a look at guard. I think you definitely want to take a look at backup offensive tackle. Generally speaking, the offensive line market is bad. I think in this case, it's not as bad as it usually is. It depends on whether or not some of these guys will end up hitting free agency. I think you can. I think you can probably take a look at some wide receivers, although I think the Vikings prefer to go young there and go into the draft at wide receiver. I think you want a camp body at punter to compete with Jeff Locke. He did improve at the end of the year. I think, I was, one of the members of the crowd, if not leading the crowd on, Jeff Locke's a bad punter and the Vikings won't admit it, which, why would they admit it? He'd been a bad punter for 2 years and it looked like he was going to be a bad punter again for most of the year. And he was for most of the year, but he proved at the end of the year. You have to give him credit, but I think that you can't decide that he shouldn't be exposed to competition throughout camp. Other than that, take a look at backup linebacker. The Vikings kept a lot of linebackers on the roster. At least see if some of these people can make it to camp. There's a couple of linebackers you could look at. I still think that just like wide receiver, that's something they want to go young at. And then figure out if Brian Robinson's your guy. You've Scott Crichton. He didn't progress as quickly as Mike Zimmer had hoped. They wanted him to be stronger and they wanted him to be more versatile. And maybe it happens to be the case that he's not as strong and versatile as they want him to be, and they need to prepare for that circumstance. They need to get another backup defensive end. I think they like Justin Treto, or Trato. But it doesn't hurt to bring in competition. The Vikings have consistently brought in competition at defensive end every year, and a lot of the people that they end up bringing in end up doing pretty well. George Johnson did a pretty good job against the Vikings for the Detroit Lions as a starting defensive end. He was a camp body with Minnesota, and he was somebody that I kind of wanted the Vikings to keep, and they didn't. This wasn't last year; it was 2 years ago. So who knows? But I think you can take a look at some of the defensive ends out there. I think that's kind of it. I'm not too happy at tight end, but I like Chase Ford. I don't know. I guess I've just never been. I've been impressed by Kyle Rudolph, but I've never been impressed upon his sustainability as a high value weapon at tight end. The 1 year he has 9 touchdowns, but he's never really had a season where he's been a consistently productive tight end. And even if you get rid of sort of all of these injury concerns, because I'm the kind of guy that doesn't really believe in injury proneness as much as many other people believe. I mean, you take a look at guys like Bob Sanders or Percy Harvin. Obviously, some people are injury prone, but I think for the most part, injury prone is just the result of injuries are spread randomly. Some people will just happen to have more injuries than others. And if Kyle Crone is not injury prone, and it's pretty good evidence that he may be because of the way his hamstrings have been treating him since like his sophomore year of college, he's still not had a consistently good year that would lead you to believe he's a sustainably good tight end that's going to earn the contract that he had already signed as an extension. He has a lot of great highlight catches, but he's already changing his route running. He had to decrease his weight for camp because of the way Norv Turner uses his tight end. So I think in a lot of ways he's kind of an unknown because he has to do something completely different from Norv Turner. So I think that tight end is someone you may want to take a look at in free agency. And then finally, you want to take a look at safeties. It's a really weak safety class in the draft this year. I don't think there's going to be any super high value safety hit free agency because Devin McCourty, far and away the best safety sort of in free agency. I don't think New England's going to let him go. If Deshaun Gibson hits free agency, obviously you want to pick him up, but I don't think he will. He's a restricted free agent. And so I think Cleveland's just gonna keep him. You could take a look at Will Hill, another restricted free agent, but for the most part, it's going to be difficult to replace safeties just because weak safety class, both in free agency and in the draft. But that's another place they want to look.
There's an article on Bleacher Report that has 10 impending free agents who they claim would be perfect fits for the Minnesota Vikings. On that list, safety Taylor Mays from Cincinnati.
That would be interesting. There's the obvious connection, right? Mike Zimmer and Taylor Mays, but Taylor Mays never did well with Mike Zimmer, right? I mean, he's another one of those super athletes, right? That if he gets everything figured out, he's going to be great.
Well, yeah, and that's the argument the article makes is that he's a big athlete, but he's never really done much of anything in the NFL. It seems like, according to said article, which you can find in the show notes, Mays was on the field for just 61 snaps this season.
Yeah, I think the author of the article actually linked the article to me, and I unfortunately didn't get the chance to finish it. I saw the one slide he was talking about. I think it was punter Brett Kern. I think that part was written pretty well. So
yes,
yeah, that was good recognition from that guy. I told him I was going to steal it from him. I was probably going to attribute it to him, but that's a good one.
No, it's a winner, and the strongest argument for Mays or a player like him is that he is an athlete, displays great athleticism, and given how small of a splash he has made in the league, he could be had for very cheaply.
No, he can be had for super cheap. I think that I don't know if I'd call him a top 10 priority, but I think he's on the short list of people the Vikings want to sign, at least to get him into camp, right? I mean, he knows the system. That's the whole reason they got Chris Crocker. Except Chris Crocker is like 40. So, you get Taylor Mays, who's young and fast. He's supposed to know the system. At least you get to push for some competition.
Yeah, and it would seem to fit into kind of the scheme that Zimmer has been trying to build, attract, young athletic talent and make the defense play good.
Yeah, Zimmer seems to be pretty good at making the defense play good, but for the most part, he's done it without Taylor Mays.
Yeah, that's accurate, but he strikes me as somebody who could potentially be a good fit.
Yeah, no, I think he's a good fit to bring into camp for sure.
So a lot of this, and I ask about the free agency stuff, kind of to set up the question: does it seem to you like the Vikings are trying to both plug existing gaps and plan for the future simultaneously?
Is that what every team's trying to do?
Well, the Broncos, not necessarily. I think that they have.
Well, ask them draft a quarterback.
Well, yeah, but you know what I mean. Like the Brett Favre team that was assembled to give the Vikings one good shot at the playoffs, and Leslie Frazier one good shot to save his career. And that there was a pretty clear understanding that was not a team that was being built to last.
Sure. No, I understand what you mean. Yeah, no, I think that's what the Vikings are doing. I think that's what you do when you have a young team that's not very good. I mean, like, you can't win now, so you can't, like, sign those splash free agents. I mean, I suppose Oakland just did that. But in fairness,
Well,
Oakland had like $80 million of cap space.
that's true.
Half the
They got
years.
money to burn. Yeah,
Yeah.
they could buy everyone an ice cream cone like everyone in America if they wanted to, and still have cap space to burn. Um, but
I think the Vikings were doing that. I mean, like, why else would you draft Scott Crichton? I mean, defensive end wasn't really seen as a whole for the Vikings. Oh, I mean, I guess if you didn't have faith in Everson Griffin, which I mean, we've talked about that.
well, yeah, and
Um,
I guess what do you mean like they can't win now? I mean, Harrison Smith said himself that he believes that the Vikings are potential playoff contenders next season.
well, I mean, so there's a very good argument for that, right? Which is that what happens if Adrian Peterson's back? Well, I mean, the Vikings probably win at least two more games over Matt Asiata / McKinnon / Tate / Banyard. Uh,
Exactly. If Matt
so
Castle were back, then we could potentially have picked up an extra win or two. There's a lot of ifs about this season that could have resulted in more wins for the Vikings, and not a whole like how many more of our starters could have like honestly been injured? I guess a couple.
right, I mean, so Kyle Rudolph was injured. Cordell Patterson was benched. Matt Khalil was Matt Khalil. Charlie Johnson was injured. I guess Vlad Duquesne wasn't injured; he was replaced. But Brandon Fusco was injured. Phil Lodeholt was injured. So Adrian Peterson was out. Jerick McKinnon was injured. Um, yeah, no, I mean Matt Castle, I guess, was injured. Teddy was even injured. So yeah, I mean, it was an unusual amount of injuries. You always feel a little hesitant to say, well, if those injuries didn't happen, we would have been great. Because every team gets injuries and they kind of strike randomly, and that's kind of what happened to the Vikings. But the Vikings have had a very good history with injury up until this year. There's been a dramatic change to their conditioning program and their nutrition program that may have contributed to that. I'm a little worried actually from that perspective. But I think they've had unusually bad injury luck last year. So you can make the argument that if they had fewer injuries, you can't make the argument that they had no injuries because that's a hypothetical world that no team exists. But if they had fewer injuries, if they had a league average number of injuries, the Vikings would have gone 8-8 or 9-7. And if you go 9-7, in some years you make the playoffs. I mean, I suppose if you go, 7-8-1, you make the playoffs in the NFC South. But if you go 9-7, some years you make the playoffs. So yeah, I think it could be a better team than last year. You take the fact that the team is pretty young at most of its starting positions, and you assume that there's growth at most of those positions. I think we all assume a little bit too much, but we can say Teddy may not be as good as he was in the last 5 games of the season, but he'll be better than he was in the first 6 games that he played in.
Wait, so you're saying that Teddy Bridgewater may not already be as good or better than Aaron Rodgers over a larger than 5-game sample?
Yeah, I think maybe it's a stretch to say Teddy is the second best quarterback in the NFL, but that's just me.
that's pretty far from a hot take, Arif. I don't know if we can really attract any clicks with lukewarm takes like that.
I'm sorry, but that's the podcast headline. Arif, Teddy Bridgewater is not the second best quarterback in the league. But yeah, okay. So assume Teddy is somewhere between the last 6 games and the first 6 games, right? So okay, fine. So that happens next year. You assume that 4 of the 5 starters in the offensive line, whoever they may end up being, probably sans Charlie Johnson, are healthy, right? You assume that out of the other skill positions, wide receiver, tight end, running back, that you don't suffer more than, say, 2 injuries at those positions. Then I think the offense is in a much better shape, and I think that they can score some of the points they needed to win those close games and get close enough in other games to lose those games instead of the ones they did lose.
Yeah, just a general risen tide.
Yeah, exactly. So the Vikings' close game record probably doesn't change, right? Because they win the close games that they were in this year, and then the hypothetical games that were not close, they're just in those games, and they just lose those instead. But that still means the Vikings have more total wins.
And really, isn't that what it's all about?
Yeah. I think it's about wins. Play to win the game.
You play to win the game.
Need dogs out there, not cats. Meow.
Meow. So I'm going to have to, go back and look here. In fact, I will start right now. But I believe that the only wildly irresponsible prognostications that we hit on were Adrian Peterson related, just because we were on all sides of that argument. I think one of us prognosticated that he was going to play like another game this season with the Vikings, and then the other one said that he would never play another game with the Vikings, and then someone said that he wasn't going to play anymore this season. Like, we were all over Adrian Peterson and whether or not he would play for the Vikings this season.
Okay, so you did take a look at all the wildly irresponsible prognostications from the year, though, and tallied them up?
No, I think even poor Justice ended up being wrong about his J.J. Watt prognostication.
Poor Justice. Was he ever on the show? Like, in the sense that he was on a show that was broadcast?
Yeah, he was. Well, he was there for episode 51, where he made the prognostication that J.J. Watt would be top 3 touchdown scorer for the Texans this season.
Wait, wasn't he right about that? So J.J. Watt had 3 receiving touchdowns, and then he also had 2 defensive touchdowns. Is that right? Yes, he has 2 defensive touchdowns and 3 receiving touchdowns. Was his prognostication offensive scorer or scorer?
It did not specify offense or defense. I think it would necessarily have to not specify, because otherwise it wouldn't be like he would have almost no chance of getting that right.
Well, yeah, but it's a wildly irresponsible prognostication. So anyway, so he has 5 touchdowns. Andrew Foster has 13. DeAndre Hopkins has 6. J.J. Watt is actually 30. He's not tied.
Wow.
Yeah. Squeaked in, though. Andre Johnson only had 3.
Hashtag Justradamus.
Yeah. I think it's Hoostradamus.
Is it? There are no rules with portmanteaus. Like.
Exactly. That's what happens when you combine words. There are no rules.
Did he finish with more? No, Calvin Johnson must have had more than 5 touchdowns.
Wait, he was having a bad year, right?
Yes, because this was Justice's subjugate prognostication from the lost episode. Which,
wait, his other prognostication was another J.J. Watt related one?
Well, yeah, because he brought it up. He wanted to come and take a victory lap like 3 weeks later before the game.
Let's see. Receiving touchdowns from Calvin Johnson, 8. I guess Calvin Johnson picked it up.
Oh, okay. That would have been like we could have just made this the Hoostradamus show if he had gotten both his wildly irresponsible prognostication and the one that he made only to us that I still wrote down. You actually may win that week as well. The episode 57, you prognosticated that J.J. Watt would win MVP, which there's certainly a loud drumbeat to have that happen.
Yeah, but the only reason it's loud is because it's not going to happen. I'm not going to win it.
It's going to go to Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, let's give it to a quarterback.
Man, this is just a trip down memory lane here. Oh, actually, we didn't do wildly irresponsible prognostications for the midseason because we did the midseason awards instead.
We should have put 1 in there, right? We should have been like, yeah, so my wildly irresponsible prognostication is that the first person to win the Assistant of the Year award is Jed Fish, who's actually fired, so that would have been pretty irresponsible.
Adrian Peterson starts in the FXFL in 2 years. I like that one.
Oh, right, because that was a hidden 2-parter because you had to also predict that the FXFL would exist in 2 years.
Would still be a thing in 2 years. Yeah, that was the year that you had a 2-parter about Michael Sam.
Oh yeah.
He'll make more endorsement money than Adrian Peterson in 2 years. That was the in 2 years prognostication set. James's was that every NFL team loses at least one player to an HGH suspension by the end of 2015.
Wow, James is starting this one off behind.
Yeah, he wildly irresponsible prognostications are not his game. It is regrettable but true. Yeah, I think the J.J. Watt one might be your closest opportunity, which is really not all that close.
No,
because it's going to be Aaron Rodgers.
I didn't get anything else.
Well, I mean, we could see the Michael Sam endorsement money, but I doubt it.
Well, yeah, first, yeah, I doubt that. Second,
that's pretty unlikely. We're gonna have to reach way back.
Yeah, the idea is to total up all
to
the
like the
prognostications.
preseason in order to see episode 49. You predicted that Matt Castle would throw for 350 plus yards. I imagine you meant in one game and not for the season, but that I think both of those turned out to be wrong.
That was a pretty reasonable, irresponsible one, though, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, for one game, we had no idea just how irresponsible it would prove to be. Did not have the benefit of foresight. That was the week that I predicted that Peterson stays with the Vikings. Kyle Segal immediately got on the other side of that one. Said that we trade away AP's rights within 3 weeks, and 3 weeks later he was wrong. You prognosticated before the St. Louis game that Sean Hill would be picked off 5 times.
That didn't happen.
It did not happen. Teddy also did not end up with 300 yards in combined offense that game, like Ted predicted.
In the St. Louis game?
Yes.
Yeah, what?
You'd have to go back and listen to that to see what he was thinking. James prognosticated that Sam Bradford would tear his other ACL while watching the game.
We can't confirm that. That may have happened.
It is possible. There's no proof that it has not. Would it matter if it had? It may as well have.
It may as well have.
You prognosticated in episode 46 Kendall Wright would make the top 10 in receiving yards this season. I prognosticated the Green Bay would miss the playoffs.
Well, I think mine was worse. I think yours is excusable because you could just be like, yeah, they just get injured all the time.
No, I think that's what I said, that Aaron Rodgers spends the season watching his team fail from the bench.
And instead, he only spent one series watching his team from the bench as he massaged his sore calf.
And then went on to throw 0 picks at home for the entire season.
That's so dumb. Screw that guy.
I know, I hate him so much. Oh, this was sad. Episode 45.
By the way, Kendall Wright finished 60th in receiving yards, behind Greg Jennings. God damn it.
Womp womp. That's okay. In episode 45, you prognosticated that Teddy Bridgewater would start no games for Minnesota this year.
That was one I admitted at the time I didn't believe. This is after the Cardinals preseason game when Teddy just balled out, and I was like, nah, we're not going to see him.
Yep. Yep, he's like, nah, he's just going to sit. We're just going to lose a bunch of games with Matt Castle or some nonsense. I prognosticated that Johnny Manziel would start 0 games for Cleveland this year.
Oh, so close. And the Browns tried their best. Like, what was it? Like, Brian Hoyer had, threw, 0 touchdowns and, 8 picks over the course of, 4 games or something like that. And they're like, yeah, no, we're sticking with Brian.
we need that experience at quarterback. And then the drumbeat just became so loud. They were like, God, fine, let the kid play.
And then they played him, and everyone was like, oh, that's what you were hiding. Wow. And then Connor Shaw, of course, he just, killed it. He's not going to get another shot for a couple of years. God, I hope they hold a competition in camp. I feel like they won't, right? Because, if there's an owner who doesn't listen to the study he commissioned on who to draft in order to draft Johnny Manziel, then that owner is the kind of person that would say, hey, so you can say there's a competition in camp, but you're starting Johnny. So I assume there's not going to be real competition in camp, although there's more evidence for this contention. So I shouldn't have said although. I should have said moreover. Moreover, there's more evidence for this contention. There is friction between Kyle Shanahan and the Browns coaching staff or ownership, and that he would be willing to make a lateral move to offensive coordinator somewhere else, even though he'd been interviewing for head coaching positions ostensibly. And that lateral move is a result of not wanting to be with the Browns for some reason, which many people speculate, and one person says is a sourced rumor related to being pressured to start Johnny Manziel as a result of the ownership. So there's actually even more evidence for the fact that if Connor Shaw were in a fair competition with Johnny Manziel and beat him out theoretically, or at least prove to be a better player by some subjective standard, that he would not win the competition that Johnny Manziel would start. So, Connor Shaw, you had a wonderful game. I'm sorry. you will not be able to do anything for a couple of years.
So quit now because it's over.
Have you taken a look at Connor Shaw's like NFL stats though? If we were into stat scouting, this dude would be so good. He throws like no interceptions.
The previous week, you prognosticated that Adrian Peterson would be traded to the Colts by the end of the trading season.
The Colts? Man, that's a random. I mean, I guess they need a running back, and they're willing to trade high picks to get one. Yeah, that's probably what I said out loud too back then.
We could probably go to the tape, and I bet it would be pretty close to that. I prognosticated that the Colts would win less than half of their games that were decided by one touchdown or less.
What was the prediction?
That the Colts wouldn't have less good luck in close games. They would win less than half of games that were decided by 7 or fewer points.
I'm not looking that up, but I'm pretty confident you did not win that one.
Yeah, no, I didn't come close.
By the way, I just looked up Connor Shaw's college stats. I'm sure if Judd Zolkat's listening, he's all about this. So out of every quarterback who threw at least 160 passes in the college season, and for reference, Shaw threw 284, he has the lowest interception rate by far, having thrown one interception in 284 attempts to 24 touchdowns. Look at those college stats. His adjusted yards per attempt in college ranks 6th out of all college quarterbacks, right behind number 5, Teddy Bridgewater.
Hey, I know that guy.
That name is familiar to me.
Yeah, no, you had a prognostication in there as well about halfway through the season where Teddy Bridgewater would finish with a higher NEA than Aaron Rodgers.
Wow.
Which, no.
We got closer than we should have reasonably expected, though.
Yeah, thanks, Teddy, for giving it the old college try.
He was in college recently.
That's true, and he was so good at that thing while in college.
Yeah, so Teddy's NEA was 5.5. Aaron Rodgers' was 8.7. Aaron Rodgers, of course, ranks number 1. Teddy ranks number 27. We got much closer than we reasonably had the right to be, and we didn't get close at all.
I'll take it.
Are you kidding? I'll take it.
Harbinger of good things for next season. Holy crap.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, other than the 2-year prognostications and hashtag Husterdramas taking down the JJ Watt prediction, I want to believe that, you know, all the Sturm und Drang being made on ESPN about how, you know, how JJ Watt really deserves to be MVP, you know, the league might, you know, go for the PR move and like, well, if we just want to give the people what they want, and, you know, JJ Watt is an American hero, and then they can, you know, take a picture of him holding the American flag in one hand and like choking an eagle in the other.
No, I am meant to be the national bird of the United States.
You made an oddly specific prognostication towards the end of the season that the Vikings draft Brandon Bridge in round 5.
Really?
The quarterback position, yeah.
Me? I don't remember making that argument at all. Did I say something about having a Bridge and a Bridgewater on the same depth chart?
I don't think so, but you might have.
I assume the argument I made was there are a lot of people around the league who actually like Brandon Bridge. He's a small school guy. You need a backup quarterback who's not Christian Ponder because his contract is up, and he's also Christian Ponder. He's a developmental guy. That is almost exactly what you said,
yes.
Well, also, he's one of those guys that the Vikings have indicated anonymously through hashtag sources that they kind of like. I mean, he's this big armed guy. He's got a good quarterback body. He's developmental. He's like McLeod Bethel Thompson.
McLeod John Baltazar Bethel Thompson.
So if the Vikings do draft Brandon Bridge, I give partial credit, right? If it's not in the 5th round.
Oh, absolutely. I would still call that a win.
Yeah.
I still hold out hope that the Vikings will, you know, move up in the 1st round and draft Brandon Scherf, but
I don't think they'll have to move up in the 1st round to do it. I hear the NFL only thinks he's a guard. So
really?
Yeah, and if you're a guard only, you drop, right? So
Well, I mean, he played both tackle positions at Iowa State. Like, I don't know why they would think that, but whatever. I'm not far from a scout. Hashtag far from scout. Yeah, so that was our year in Wildly Irresponsible Prognostications. We got the best one right, though, when we correctly told our listeners to pick the over before the season on 6.5 wins. And everybody's ship, including producer James's, came in on the very last week of the season when we waxed the Bears in a game that it looked like the Vikings were having fun playing, and the Bears were like waiting for a bus.
Yeah, the Bears had clearly stopped playing. They quit. They quit like 2 weeks before that game.
They quit when Jay Cutler was benched. Well, actually, they probably quit before Jay Cutler was benched, and then no one told them to start playing again.
Man, could you imagine if we had the ability to play Jimmy Clausen though? Darn concussions.
Jimmy Clausen adds to his winless streak of games that he has started in the NFL.
He had a streak going before that game?
Yeah. I think it was a pretty good one. I think it was like 13 games or something that he had started at the team and ended up losing.
Wow. All right then.
I don't know. We've gone over so much of this on the show in great, detail as the season has gone by. But looking forward, the brightest bright spot has to be just a sturdy defense and kind of a discipline that leads to not drawing lots of penalties on both sides of the ball. Are those is that enough? I mean, would we be able to, if we could just have a league average offense and league average injuries and league average special teams, would that be enough to, get us into the playoffs? I mean, are we still in the same situation as, any team in the AFC East where they have to, get through New England to get to the playoffs? Like, do we still have to figure out a way to get through Green Bay to get through the playoffs? Like what, and if it's not enough, I mean, where do we need to improve the most?
I think it's enough to get into the playoffs, but I think that you're right that the situation is a little bit difficult because of Green Bay. Often I think the route to the playoffs would be through the wild card. Difficult because the NFC West exists. I assume San Francisco is going to rebound unless they get a terrible coach to replace Harbaugh, which is certainly possible. But, I think the issue with Green Bay is that, they have an unpredictable defense in terms of how good it is from year to year and from game to game. Because sometimes that defense can be really good. Maybe not in terms of like yards given up or whatever, but in terms of like adjusted net yards per attempt allowed, run success rate allowed. It's the kind of defense that can spur turnovers at times. In some years they just don't do it, right? And so some years the defense is bad and they have to win shootouts. And if you have a really good defense and a league average offense, you can win a shootout because you can stop it from being a shootout with your defense. Unfortunately, when Aaron Rodgers is on, he's nearly unstoppable, which I guess is the argument for him being the MVP. So, who knows? But I think it is enough to get into the playoffs despite those divisional troubles. I assume that Terrell Austin is getting serious offers as a head coach, or at least serious interviews, rather, as a head coach. And it would be so interesting if the Lions lost their defensive coordinator after 1 year of stellar performance as a defensive coordinator for the Lions. So the Lions could lose both their amazing defensive coordinator and Ndamukong Suh, which would make, I think that alone would make them non-contenders for the NFC North. And that would put the Vikings in a really good spot to maybe fluke into a couple of victories to put them ahead of the Green Bay Packers or put them in contention for a wild card. So yeah, I think league average offense, special teams, injury rate, with a very good defense is enough to do well. I don't think that the league is set up in a way that offense is more sustainable than defense in terms of ways to win games. I think that the league is set up in a way that investments in offense maybe pay off a little bit better, but in terms of how you win games, it's by putting up more points than the other guy, and sometimes that means reducing the other guy to not putting up that many points.
That's true. Seattle cruise to victory in the end of the season by holding its last 5 opponents to 7 or fewer points. I mean,
Their
maybe not the
defense is playing
strongest.
lights out right now.
That's true, and even maybe they're not playing the strongest opponents, but this is the Seattle defense that won the Super Bowl.
Exactly.
They've been hanging out in the basement, the first half of the season, and they're
relative
true to form. Well, relative, yeah, but they're firing on all cylinders now.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance that the Seahawks are in a spot where they're once again they have a better than 50% chance of making it to the Super Bowl and doing well there. Right? Like I think they have a better than 50% chance of having a close game in the Super Bowl.
Wow. Conventional wisdom says, well, maybe not conventional wisdom, but a lot of the prognostications I have read suggest that people like the Packers. But
yeah, I'm sure they do.
That's fine and good for them.
I mean, wait, the Seahawks, they played the Packers at the beginning of the year. I actually don't remember how that game went. The only thing I remember from that game is about an individual matchup and not the actual score. Because I remember Richard Sherman wasn't thrown at once. Jordy Nelson never lined up over him. And the story after the game was, now I have to look this up because it was such an insane game. Hey, the Seahawks won 36-16. The story,
yes, they waxed them.
Yeah, the story of the game was the Green Bay Packers solved Richard Sherman, which that's dumb. Because they reduced themselves to playing a 10-on-10 game, and they telegraphed that they were throwing to Jordy Nelson, and they only put up 16 points. So they solved Richard Sherman by playing exactly into Seattle's hands. So I assume that maybe that game won't be that as close as that was, but with the defense playing better than ever, and the offense actually playing better than ever. I think the offense for the Seattle Seahawks is playing much better than it had been earlier in the season because I think Russell Wilson is back. Maybe he's not back to his 2013, but he's much closer to his 2013 form at the end of the season than he was at the beginning of the season. And so, from that perspective, I think that the Seahawks are even better set up to win against the Packers should it come to that in the NFC Championship game.
I guess just to put a final point on our kind of meandering season in review, such as it is, it seems like the Vikings blogosphere, the various other Vikings podcasts and the comment sections on a lot of the local blogs are cautiously to unbridledly optimistic about 2015 for the Vikings. I fall into the unbridled optimism camp. I think that given what the Vikings had to work with, we performed way above expectation. And I think a lot of that performance was not due to just obvious gimmickry. I think the foundation for a strong and lasting playoff quality team is mostly in place. And if we can just find some solutions at a couple of key positions, then I think it'll be us and Green Bay fighting for wild card and division dominance respectively for the next few years.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I don't think the Vikings had unusual fumble luck. I don't think they had an unusual close game record. In fact, I'm counting up now. I think there were 3-4 in close games this year. I'm not going to double check, but that seems about right. Which means that they're not in a situation where they're likely to have this odd looking regression in their record. There is this issue. So somebody brought up, Teddy still hasn't won against like a 500 or better team or something along those lines. Which I guess about to beat the Buffalo Bills, who finished 9-7. About to beat the Buffalo Bills, lost the game through no fault of his own. And he got pretty close to beating the Miami Dolphins. I think the Detroit Lions game, although he played lights out. Obviously, he wasn't in the cards. That sort of stuff. whatever. But I think that that is significant that the Vikings beat a bunch of bad teams and lost to a bunch of good teams. But that just means the Vikings, sort of with the unusual place that they were at, were a league average team, which I mean, like a 7-9 record does speak to that, especially because, like 3 of those losses and 1 of those wins occurred without Teddy Bridgewater at the helm. And, the win was against the St. Louis Rams, who at the time, I think they played worse in that game than they had for the rest of the year. So, I mean, like, I think from that perspective, I think the Vikings are in a better spot I think there are more reasons for the Vikings to improve next year than they are to suffer from movement downwards. I think regression is in the Vikings' favor. I think regression to their true mean would mean something like a 9-7 record, maybe a 10-6 record. And I think that a 10-6 record for a lot of people for this Viking squad is unbridled optimism because, after Adrian stopped playing, who expected a season even close to 7-9? In fact, I think my prediction at the beginning of the year was 7-9 exactly. That assumed that Adrian Peterson was playing, that the Vikings would improve, but not drastically improve their defense. They drastically improved their defense. And I assumed that the Vikings would maintain a league average offense because I assumed Bridgewater's better than Ponder. True. But I kind of just assumed that the offensive line would do the thing that it had always done, forgetting, of course, that, things happen. So, I assumed that the Vikings would continue to have an average offense and improve their defense and therefore go 7-9. They win 7-9 without some of those things happening. I think that the offense is a lot of places to go. I'm not going to say nowhere to go but up, but I think has more propensity to improve. And I think the defense has propensity to either stay the same or improve slightly. And so I think that means a winning record. And anytime you have a winning record, you got a shot at the playoffs.
Well, and isn't it nice that at the end of the season, we're not like only 226 more days until Adrian Peterson comes back,
Right.
Like we're not married to one superstar whose fate as a Viking is in jeopardy. If he gets traded, yeah, all right, we'll probably get a lot of value in the trade. It'll be okay for the Vikings if he stays. It'll be okay for the Vikings if he goes, which is a really good spot to be in when you stop and think about how much of our kind of hopes and dreams were pinned on AP in years past.
1 second. I'm making fun of Canada. Sorry.
Oh, there's always time for making fun of Canada.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I think that the Vikings. So I think Darren Page disagrees with me, and I think whenever that happens, that's significant. Because he is a football mind that I pay attention to. But I think, the Vikings are in a spot where I wouldn't say they can, give or take Adrian Peterson, but I think they're in a spot where the trade value for Adrian Peterson may help the Vikings ameliorate a loss of Peterson better than at any other time in Vikings / Adrian Peterson history. Because, and this is my argument, that trading Adrian Peterson would necessarily be a loss for the Vikings, even if it's a good thing to do. Because the synergistic value of Adrian Peterson to the Vikings, if the offense is built around him, is more than the value that Adrian Peterson can bring to another organization, because they're not built to maximize what he can do, which is fine. Having the best running back in your league incidentally on your team is very good, but it is not as important to the team as it is for the Vikings to sort of build themselves around the way that he plays, the style of offense. You set your schedule to Adrian Peterson. You script your plays according to Adrian Peterson, all that jazz. You run to score, and then you run to bleed at the clock, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think that even though that's still a little true, I think that the Vikings are in a spot where they've proven that doesn't have to be true. And therefore, I think they can get more, relatively speaking, in terms of a trade, even if they can get less, absolutely speaking, in terms of a trade.
Yeah, and I mean, if this season was any indication, if last season is, more like this season, or if next season, is, a more concentrated version of this season in terms of, play style and offense, then yeah, the whatever we can trade or whatever we can get in trade for Adrian Peterson will probably be more valuable than, running back performance, like you were saying, just because, how much can he really impact any modern NFL offense? I mean,
he'll help a lot.
Yeah, but unless, like you were saying, they write an offense for Adrian Peterson, I mean, there's like, how many more wins in a season is he worth than, a league average running back? 1, maybe 2?
Yeah, so this is always a difficult conversation because, interestingly enough, wins is poorly defined because, and you're right, you compare it to like a league average running back or a replacement level running back, which is not the same definition in football, I think, as it is in baseball, because replacement level just means, the best available player you can call up from the minors, functionally free. Here, because we have an off season that allows us to spend a significant amount of draft resources, replacement level means pretty good running back in the draft or pretty good running back in free agency. So not free, but replacement level. I think that you're right that it doesn't, quote unquote, add that many wins, but it's also true that over the course of the season, the Vikings would have won more games. They probably would have won 2 more close games. They probably would have made 2 more games close, and that makes them 9-7, with Adrian Peterson versus without, right? But that doesn't mean he's worth 2 wins. That means that the win probability of those games was near 50, right? And that he adds, in amount over Jerick McKinnon and Matt Asiata that pushes that 50 to like 65 or something like that. Which means over the course of the season, he may be worth, what's like 0.1 times 16. It's 1.6 wins. That's a lot for a running back. That's a ton for a running back. But, that same investment, like $12 million of cap space, may buy you more than 1.6 wins plus the draft space for a league average running back.
Exactly. So, good job, Vikings. We will check in with you throughout the offseason as free agency winds down and we can start the long march towards draft day. I remember that being a torturous time for the podcast.
Because they moved it back. Well, that's not the only reason. We would have agonized if they didn't. But we agonized more.
Just so much agony. It's like they're stringing us along on purpose. You may be surprised to learn that our playoff coverage went long. Long and meandering. We will bring you the second half of episode 61 tomorrow. In the meantime, take a look at and like our Facebook page at facebook.com/Daily Norseman if you haven't already. Follow the show at Norse Code DN on Twitter for updates. You can always find new episodes on dailynorseman.com, and be sure to visit norsecodepodcast.com, the official website of the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings, Norse Code. We'll be back tomorrow with the Weekend 1 playoff recap and Week 2 playoff preview, but until then, I'm Dusty O'Connell at Dusty O'Connell on Twitter, and for Arif Hassan at Arif Hassan NFL on Twitter, and James Bogachnik at Big Mono on Twitter, our formula is this: Christian Ponder sucks. Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.